Mother Bear shared an IV drip with a dehydrated baby. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The summer heat pressed down on Pine Ridge like a heavy blanket, making even the trees seem to gasp for air. Dr. Sophia Winters wiped the sweat from her forehead as she checked the temperature on the small clinic's broken air conditioner for the third time that morning. Nothing. The old machine had given up 2 days ago, right when she needed it most. "Still nothing from the repair guy?" asked Nurse Carmen Rodriguez, her voice barely above a whisper. She was standing beside a small crib where 6-month-old baby Lily Chen lay motionless, her tiny chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Sophia shook her head, her eyes fixed on the IV drip that hung beside the crib. The clear liquid moved slowly through the plastic tube, drop by precious drop, into the baby's fragile arm. "The roads are still blocked from the landslide. Nobody's getting through until tomorrow at the earliest." Carmen's face showed the same worry that had been eating at Sophia for the past 12 hours. Baby Lily had been brought in by her parents, Marcus and Diana Chen, after 3 days of severe diarrhea and vomiting. The little girl had lost so much fluid that her skin felt like paper, and her eyes had sunk deep into her skull. "How much saline do we have left?" Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer would make her stomach turn. "This bag, and maybe half of another one," Carmen replied, adjusting the IV line with gentle hands. "At this rate, we'll run out by evening." The Chen family sat in the corner of the small clinic room, their faces etched with the kind of fear that only parents of a sick child could understand. Marcus held Diana's hand so tightly that his knuckles had turned white, while Diana stared at their daughter with eyes that hadn't blinked in minutes. "We should try calling the helicopter service again," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "Maybe they can get through now." Sophia had already tried 3 times that morning. The pilot had been clear. The mountain winds were too strong, and the smoke from the forest fires made visibility impossible. They were on their own until the weather cleared. The clinic felt smaller than usual, with its single room serving as both emergency ward and recovery area. Sophia had been running this place for 8 years, but she'd never felt as helpless as she did right now. The walls seemed to press in on her as she watched the IV bag slowly drain, each drop carrying away a piece of her hope. "Doctor, look," Carmen whispered, pointing toward the window that faced the forest. Sophia turned to see what had caught her attention, and her breath stopped in her throat. A massive brown bear stood at the edge of the clearing, not 50 feet from the clinic. But this wasn't just any bear. This was a mother with her cub, and something about the way she stood made Sophia's skin crawl with unease. The mother bear was huge, probably weighing close to 400 pounds, with dark brown fur that seemed almost black in the harsh sunlight. Her cub, much smaller but still larger than a house cat, stayed close to her side. But what made Sophia's heart race wasn't their size. It was the way the mother bear kept looking toward the clinic, as if she could sense something inside. "Should we close the door?" Carmen asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sophia looked at the clinic's main entrance, which they'd left open to let in what little breeze there was. The screen door was the only thing between them and the outside world, and it wouldn't stop a determined bear for even a second. "Let's not make any sudden movements," Sophia whispered. "Bears usually avoid humans. She'll probably move on in a few minutes." But the mother bear didn't move on. Instead, she began walking slowly toward the clinic, her massive paws making no sound on the dry grass. The cub followed, staying so close that it seemed to be attached to its mother's shadow. Marcus noticed the change in atmosphere and looked up from where he'd been holding Diana's hand. When he saw the bear approaching through the window, his face went pale. "Oh, God," he whispered. "Diana, don't look outside." But Diana had already turned, and the sight of the enormous bear made her grip her husband's hand even tighter. "What does it want?" she breathed. The mother bear stopped just outside the screen door, her dark eyes seeming to look right through the mesh and into the clinic. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, her massive head tilted slightly as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Then, to everyone's horror and amazement, she reached out with one enormous paw and gently pushed against the screen door. The latch, which had been broken for weeks, gave way easily, and the door swung open with a soft creak. "Nobody move," Sophia whispered, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Just stay perfectly still." The mother bear stepped into the clinic, her massive frame filling the doorway. She moved with surprising grace for such a large animal, her claws clicking softly on the linoleum floor. The cub followed, pressing against its mother's leg as they both entered the small space. Carmen's breathing had become so shallow that Sophia was worried she might faint. The Chen family sat frozen in their chairs, their eyes wide with terror as the enormous bear moved slowly through the room. But what happened next made Sophia question everything she thought she knew about animals. The mother bear walked directly to baby Lily's crib, ignoring the 4 adults who sat paralyzed with fear. She looked down at the tiny infant, her dark eyes soft with something that looked almost like recognition. The cub, meanwhile, had begun making small whimpering sounds. Sophia noticed for the first time that the young bear looked thin, almost gaunt, and its breathing seemed labored. The mother bear looked down at her cub with obvious concern, then back at the human baby in the crib. "What is she doing?" Diana whispered, so quietly that Sophia barely heard her. The mother bear's attention had focused on the IV drip hanging beside the crib. She stared at it for a long moment, watching the steady drip of saline solution as it traveled down the plastic tube. Then she did something that made everyone in the room gasp. She carefully positioned her cub beneath the IV bag, right next to the crib where baby Lily lay. The cub seemed to understand what its mother wanted, and opened its mouth, allowing the drops of saline solution to fall onto its tongue. "She knows," Sophia breathed, unable to believe what she was seeing. "She knows what the IV is for." The mother bear looked at Sophia with eyes that seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond what any animal should possess. Then she gently nudged the IV tube with her nose, redirecting the drip so that it fell between her cub and the human baby, sharing the life-saving fluid between them. In that moment, Sophia realized that she was witnessing something that would change everything she thought she knew about the connection between humans and animals. The mother bear wasn't just seeking help for her cub. She was offering to share the only medical treatment available with a human baby she'd never seen before. The question that burned in Sophia's mind was simple, but terrifying. How could a wild bear possibly know that a dehydrated baby needed the same treatment as her own cub? And what did this mean for everything they thought they understood about the intelligence of wild animals? As the saline solution continued to drip slowly between the 2 babies, Sophia realized that this was only the beginning of something much larger and more mysterious than anyone in that room could have imagined. The silence in the clinic stretched on, broken only by the steady drip of the IV and the soft breathing of both babies. Sophia watched in fascination as the mother bear's cub seemed to gain strength from each drop of saline that touched its tongue. The young bear's breathing became less labored, and a faint color returned to its nose. But what happened next made Sophia's medical training feel completely useless. The mother bear began making soft grunting sounds, almost like she was talking to her cub. The young bear responded with tiny squeaks, and then something incredible occurred. The cub gently nuzzled against baby Lily's hand, which was hanging outside the crib. "Did you see that?" Carmen whispered, her voice filled with wonder instead of fear. "The cub is trying to comfort the baby." Sophia nodded, unable to speak. In her 8 years of medical practice, she'd never seen anything like this. The cub seemed to understand that the human baby was as sick as it had been, and some instinct was driving it to offer comfort. Diana Chen had tears streaming down her face as she watched the incredible scene unfold. "Marcus," she whispered, "look at our baby's face." Everyone turned to look at baby Lily, and what they saw made their hearts skip. For the first time in 3 days, the infant's face showed signs of improvement. Her breathing had become more regular, and the terrible gray color that had worried Sophia was slowly being replaced by a healthier pink. "The shared IV is working," Sophia said, hardly believing her own words. "Both babies are responding to the treatment." The mother bear seemed to understand Sophia's words because she looked directly at the doctor with what could only be described as gratitude. Then she did something that made everyone in the room gasp again. She carefully picked up her cub in her mouth and placed it even closer to baby Lily, so close that the 2 infants were almost touching. The cub curled up against the side of the crib, its warm body providing heat for the human baby who had been shivering despite the summer heat outside. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice filled with emotion. "How does she know what to do?" Sophia was asking herself the same question. Everything about this situation defied logic. Bears were supposed to be dangerous, especially mothers with cubs. They weren't supposed to share medical treatment with humans, and they certainly weren't supposed to understand the concept of mutual aid. But as she watched the mother bear gently adjust the IV tube to make sure both babies continued to receive the saline solution, Sophia began to suspect that there was much more to this story than a simple coincidence. "Carmen," she said quietly, "check the medical supply cabinet. See if we have any electrolyte solution left." Carmen moved slowly toward the supply cabinet, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle the mother bear. As she opened the cabinet door, she froze. "Doctor," she whispered, "there's something strange here." "What do you mean strange?" Sophia asked, though she had a feeling she didn't want to know the answer. "The cabinet door is scratched," Carmen said, running her fingers over deep claw marks in the metal. "These scratches look fresh, like they were made today." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. The cabinet was kept locked, and only she and Carmen had keys. But the scratches Carmen was describing could only have been made by something with very large, very sharp claws. "That's not possible," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. The mother bear was watching her with those intelligent dark eyes, and Sophia had the unsettling feeling that the animal understood every word being spoken. "Doctor," Marcus said, his voice tight with worry, "how long has that bear been in the area?" It was a good question, and one that Sophia should have asked earlier. She'd been so focused on baby Lily's condition that she hadn't thought about the bigger picture. But now, as she looked at the claw marks on the supply cabinet and the way the mother bear seemed to know exactly what to do with the IV equipment, she realized that this might not be the first time the bear had been inside the clinic. "I need to check something," she said, moving slowly toward her desk where she kept the clinic's logbook. The mother bear watched her movements but didn't seem alarmed, which somehow made the situation even more unsettling. Sophia opened the logbook and began flipping through the recent entries. What she found made her hands shake. 3 weeks ago, she'd made a note about finding the back door unlocked when she arrived in the morning. She'd assumed she'd forgotten to lock it, but now she wasn't so sure. 2 weeks ago, she'd noticed that some of the medical supplies had been moved around, but nothing was missing. She'd blamed it on Carmen having a busy day and not putting everything back in its proper place. 1 week ago, she'd found muddy paw prints on the clinic floor, but she'd assumed they belonged to a dog belonging to one of her patients. "Oh my God," she whispered, the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together in her mind. "What is it?" Diana asked, noticing the change in Sophia's expression. Sophia looked up from the logbook, her eyes moving between the Chen family, Carmen, and the mother bear, who was still carefully monitoring both babies. "I think," she said slowly, "this bear has been watching us, learning from us." The mother bear's ears perked up at Sophia's words, confirming her suspicions. This wasn't a random encounter. The bear had been observing the clinic probably for weeks, learning how the medical equipment worked and understanding what it was used for. "But why?" Carmen asked. "Why would a bear care about human medical procedures?" Before Sophia could answer, the mother bear did something that answered the question more clearly than words ever could. She gently nuzzled her cub, then looked toward a corner of the clinic that Sophia had never paid much attention to. Following the bear's gaze, Sophia noticed something she'd somehow missed before. In the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of supply boxes, was a small pile of what looked like herbs and berries. But these weren't random forest debris. They were arranged in a specific pattern, almost like someone had been experimenting with different combinations. "Carmen," Sophia said, her voice barely audible. "Go look at that pile in the corner. But be very careful." Carmen approached the corner slowly, with the mother bear watching her every move. When she reached the pile of herbs and berries, she knelt down to examine them more closely. What she saw made her gasp. "Doctor," she called out, "these are medicinal plants. Elderberries, willow bark, echinacea. Someone has been collecting natural remedies." The mother bear made a soft grunting sound, almost like she was confirming Carmen's discovery. Sophia realized with growing amazement that the bear hadn't just been watching them work. She'd been trying to help in her own way, using the natural knowledge that animals possessed about healing plants. "She's been trying to treat her cub," Sophia said, the full picture finally becoming clear. But the natural remedies weren't strong enough for severe dehydration. That's why she brought her cub here. The implications of this discovery were staggering. If Sophia was right, it meant that this mother bear had not only learned to recognize human medical procedures, but had also understood that sometimes natural remedies weren't enough. She'd made the decision to seek help from humans, despite every instinct that should have told her to avoid them. But the biggest shock was still to come. As Sophia watched the mother bear continue to share the IV drip between her cub and baby Lily, she noticed something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the boundaries between human and animal intelligence. The mother bear was counting the drops. She would watch exactly 10 drops fall into her cub's mouth, then gently redirect the tube so that 10 drops would fall into baby Lily's mouth, then back again. She was ensuring that both babies received exactly the same amount of treatment, demonstrating a level of mathematical understanding that shouldn't have been possible for a wild animal. "This changes everything," Sophia whispered, realizing that she was witnessing something that would revolutionize the way humans understood animal intelligence. But as she watched the mother bear continue her careful count, ensuring perfect equality between the two babies, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more secrets to uncover. The scratches on the supply cabinet, the medicinal herbs in the corner, and the bear's impossible knowledge of medical procedures all pointed to something much larger than a simple story of animal compassion. The question that burned in her mind was no longer just how the bear knew what to do. Now she was wondering who had taught her. As if sensing Sophia's thoughts, the mother bear suddenly stopped her careful counting and turned toward the clinic's back door. Her ears pricked up, and she made a low rumbling sound that seemed almost like a warning. The cub immediately responded, lifting its head from where it had been resting beside baby Lily. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, noticing the change in the bear's behavior. Before anyone could answer, they heard it too. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the back of the clinic. But these weren't the heavy boots of a rescue worker or the quick pace of someone in a hurry. These footsteps had a rhythm to them, almost like someone was trying to move quietly. The mother bear made another soft grunt, but this time it sounded different. Not threatening, but almost welcoming, like she recognized whoever was approaching. Sophia felt her heart racing as she realized that someone else was involved in this incredible situation. Someone who might have answers to the questions that were multiplying in her mind by the minute. The back door of the clinic opened slowly, and a figure stepped inside. It was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, with long gray hair tied back in a ponytail and wearing clothes that looked like they'd been made from animal skins. His face was weathered and lined, like someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. But what struck Sophia most was the way the mother bear reacted to his presence. Instead of becoming defensive or protective, she actually seemed to relax. She made a soft chuffing sound, almost like a greeting, and the man responded with a similar sound. "Hello, Mira," the man said softly, addressing the mother bear by name. "I see you brought your little one to the right place." Sophia's mouth dropped open. Not only did this stranger know the bear's name, but he was talking to her like they were old friends. The bear, Mira, responded with another soft grunt and gestured with her massive head toward the two babies sharing the IV drip. "Who are you?" Sophia managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at her with kind but serious eyes. "My name is Thomas Whitehorse," he said. "And I think it's time you knew the truth about what's been happening here." Carmen, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally found her voice. "You know this bear? You've been training her?" Thomas smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Not training," he said. "Teaching. There's a difference." He moved slowly toward where Mira was still carefully monitoring the IV drip, and Sophia noticed that he walked with a slight limp. As he got closer, she could see that his left arm was in a makeshift sling, and there were what looked like recent bandages on his hands. "You're hurt," Diana said, her maternal instincts kicking in despite the strange situation. Thomas nodded. 3 weeks ago, I was attacked by a different bear, a young male who was sick and desperate. Mira here found me in the forest, bleeding and unable to move. He reached out and gently touched the mother bear's massive head. She saved my life. The pieces of the puzzle started coming together in Sophia's mind. "That's when she started coming to the clinic," she said. "She was trying to help you." "At first, yes," Thomas confirmed. "But I'm old, and my injuries were healing slowly. Mira would watch me try to treat my wounds with traditional remedies, and then she'd disappear for hours at a time. I didn't know where she was going until I followed her one day." He gestured toward the clinic around them. "She'd been coming here, watching you work, learning how you helped people. She saw that your methods were more effective than mine, especially for serious injuries and illnesses." Sophia felt like she was living in a dream. But how could she understand what she was seeing? How could she learn medical procedures just by watching? Thomas's expression grew even more serious. "Because Mira isn't just any bear, she's what my people call a spirit bear, one of the few animals born with a connection to both the natural world and the human world. They appear once in a generation, maybe less." Spirit bear? Marcus asked, clearly skeptical. You're talking about magic? I'm talking about intelligence, Thomas replied firmly. An intelligence that goes beyond what most people think animals are capable of. Mira can understand human speech, learn complex tasks, and even predict outcomes based on what she observes. As if to prove his point, Mira suddenly made a series of different sounds. Short grunts, longer rumbles, and soft chuffing noises. Thomas listened carefully, then turned to Sophia with an expression of concern. She says the IV bag is almost empty, and she's worried about both babies. She wants to know if you have more medicine. Sophia looked at the IV bag and realized with horror that Mira was right. In all the excitement, she'd forgotten to monitor the fluid level. The bag was nearly empty, and they still had no way to get more supplies until the roads were cleared. We have maybe one more bag, she said, her heart sinking. But that won't last through the night. Thomas nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of. He looked at Mira and made a series of sounds that seemed to be some kind of communication. The bear responded immediately, carefully lifting her cub away from the IV drip and positioning it beside baby Lily in a way that kept both babies warm. What's she doing? Carmen asked. She's preparing for what comes next, Thomas said. Mira knows that the medical supplies won't be enough. She's going to do something that I've never seen a spirit bear do before. What do you mean? Sophia asked, though she had a feeling she didn't want to know the answer. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching as Mira gently nuzzled both babies. She's going to share her life force with them, he said finally. It's something that only the most powerful spirit bears can do, and it usually means... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Usually means what? Diana asked, her voice tight with fear. Usually means the spirit bear doesn't survive, Thomas whispered. The clinic fell silent except for the soft breathing of the two babies and the steady drip of the nearly empty IV bag. Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes as she realized what Mira was preparing to do. This incredible, intelligent creature was willing to sacrifice her own life to save both her cub and a human baby she'd never met before. There has to be another way, she said desperately. There has to be something we can do. Thomas shook his head sadly. I've seen it before, with Mira's mother. Once a spirit bear makes this decision, nothing can change their mind. They see it as their purpose, their reason for existing. But as they watched, something unexpected happened. Mira suddenly lifted her head and looked directly at Thomas. She made a series of urgent sounds, and Thomas's eyes widened with surprise. What's she saying? Marcus asked. Thomas listened carefully, then broke into a smile for the first time since he'd entered the clinic. She's not giving up her life force, he said. She's asking for something else entirely. What? Sophia asked, hope creeping back into her voice. She wants me to call the others, Thomas said. There are more spirit bears in these mountains, and Mira believes that together they can save both babies without anyone having to die. Sophia felt her heart racing again, but this time with excitement rather than fear. How many others are there? I don't know for sure, Thomas admitted. Spirit bears are secretive creatures, but if Mira is calling for help, it means she knows they're out there. He moved toward the back door of the clinic, then paused. I need to warn you, he said. If other spirit bears come here, everything you think you know about the relationship between humans and animals will change forever. Are you prepared for that? Sophia looked around the clinic at Carmen, who was watching the two babies with tears in her eyes, at Marcus and Diana, who were holding each other tightly as they watched their daughter, and at Mira, who was still carefully monitoring both infants despite her own exhaustion. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes to save these babies." Thomas nodded and stepped outside. A few moments later, they heard a sound unlike anything Sophia had ever experienced. It was part howl, part song, and part something else entirely. A call that seemed to echo through the mountains and reach into the very soul of everyone who heard it. Mira responded immediately with her own call, and then they waited. Within minutes, other sounds began echoing back from different directions. Deep, powerful calls that seemed to shake the very foundations of the clinic. "How many are coming?" Carmen asked, her voice filled with awe. Thomas came back inside, his face glowing with something that looked like hope. "All of them," he said. "Every spirit bear in the region is responding to the call. I've never seen anything like it." As if to confirm his words, shadows began moving at the edge of the forest. Large shadows that moved with purpose and intelligence. Sophia counted at least 6 different bears approaching the clinic, each one as massive and impressive as Mira. But what happened next made her realize that this was only the beginning of the most extraordinary night of her life. As the first of the other spirit bears reached the clinic, it did something that defied everything she thought she knew about wild animals. It knocked politely on the front door. The sound echoed through the clinic. 3 deliberate knocks, just like a human visitor would make. Sophia looked at Thomas, who was smiling despite the seriousness of the situation. "They're asking permission to enter," he explained. "Spirit bears understand the concept of hospitality. They won't come into a human dwelling without being invited." Sophia walked slowly to the front door, her heart pounding. Through the screen, she could see an enormous black bear waiting patiently. Its eyes held the same intelligence she'd seen in Mira, and it was watching her with what looked like respectful curiosity. "You're welcome here," she said, opening the door. "Please, come in." The bear entered the clinic with the same careful grace that Mira had shown, followed by another bear and then another. Within minutes, the small clinic was filled with 6 of the largest, most intelligent bears Sophia had ever seen. But instead of chaos, there was an incredible sense of organization. Each bear seemed to know exactly what to do. One positioned itself near the supply cabinet, another near the medical equipment, and a third near the window where it could watch for any approaching danger. Mira made a series of sounds that Thomas translated as introductions. "She's telling them about the situation," he said, "about the babies and the shortage of medical supplies." The bears listened intently, occasionally making soft sounds of their own. Then, to Sophia's amazement, they began to work together in a way that seemed almost human in its coordination. The largest bear, a massive male with silver-tipped fur, approached the IV equipment and began examining it with obvious understanding. Another bear, smaller but with remarkably expressive eyes, went to the supply cabinet and began investigating the remaining medical supplies. "They're assessing the situation," Thomas explained, "trying to figure out how to help with the resources available." But what the bears did next went beyond anything Sophia could have imagined. The silver-tipped male made a deep rumbling sound, and suddenly all the bears began moving toward the back door of the clinic. "Where are they going?" Diana asked, clutching Marcus's hand. Thomas listened to the sounds the bears were making, his expression growing more amazed by the minute. "They're going to get help," he said, "but not the kind of help you'd expect." Within an hour, the bears began returning to the clinic, but they weren't alone. Each bear was accompanied by other forest animals, deer, rabbits, even a family of raccoons, and all of these animals were carrying something in their mouths. "What are they bringing?" Carmen asked, staring in wonder as the parade of animals continued. Thomas examined what the animals were depositing near the clinic entrance. "Medicinal plants," he said, his voice filled with amazement. "But not just any medicinal plants. These are specific herbs that can be used to create a natural saline solution." Sophia's medical training kicked in as she realized what the bears were trying to do. "They're making their own IV fluid," she said, "using natural ingredients." The silver-tipped male bear seemed to understand her words and nodded in what looked like confirmation. Then he did something that made everyone in the clinic gasp. He walked over to the sink, turned on the water tap with his paw, and began washing the herbs that the other animals had brought. "He knows about sterilization," Sophia whispered. "He understands that the herbs need to be clean before they can be used medicinally." What followed was the most extraordinary medical procedure Sophia had ever witnessed. The bears worked together with scientific precision, cleaning herbs, crushing them to extract their essences, and mixing them with clean water to create a natural electrolyte solution. But the most amazing part was how they tested their creation. The silver-tipped male carefully tasted a small amount of the mixture, considered it for a moment, then made adjustments by adding more of certain herbs and less of others. "He's adjusting the formula," Thomas said, watching with the same amazement as everyone else, "making sure it has the right balance of minerals and nutrients." When the bears were satisfied with their natural IV solution, they did something that brought tears to Sophia's eyes. They presented it to her for approval, as if they understood that she was the medical expert and wanted her to confirm that their creation was safe for the babies. Sophia examined the clear liquid they'd created. It had a faint herbal smell, but otherwise looked remarkably similar to commercial saline solution. More importantly, when she tested it with some basic equipment, it showed proper pH levels and mineral content. "It's perfect," she said, hardly believing her own words. "This could actually work." The bears seemed to understand her approval because they immediately began setting up their own version of an IV system. Using hollow reeds they'd brought from the forest, they created a natural tube system that could deliver their herbal solution to both babies. But what happened next was perhaps the most touching moment of the entire extraordinary night. As the bears prepared to administer their natural treatment, Mira made a soft sound that caused all the other bears to step back. She wanted to be the one to help both babies, to complete what she'd started when she first shared the original IV drip between them. With infinite care, Mira positioned the natural IV system so that both her cub and baby Lily could receive the life-saving herbal solution. But this time, there was enough for both babies to receive as much as they needed, without having to share a single drop. As the natural medicine began to flow, both babies showed immediate signs of improvement. Baby Lily's color continued to improve, and her breathing became stronger. Mira's cub became more alert and active, nuzzling against the human baby in a gesture of friendship. "They're going to be okay," Diana whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Both of them are going to be okay." But even as relief flooded through the clinic, Sophia realized that this incredible night had raised more questions than it had answered. How many other spirit bears were there? What other abilities did they possess? And most importantly, what did this mean for the future relationship between humans and the animal kingdom? As she watched the bears continue to monitor both babies throughout the night, working together with a level of cooperation and intelligence that challenged everything she'd been taught about animal behavior, Sophia knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The mother bear hadn't just shared an IV drip with a human baby. She'd opened a door between two worlds that had been separated for far too long. As dawn began to break over Pine Ridge, the clinic had transformed into something that looked more like a wildlife sanctuary than a medical facility. The 6 spirit bears had arranged themselves in a perfect circle around the 2 babies, creating a living fortress of protection. Each bear took turns monitoring the natural IV system they'd created, ensuring that both infants continued to receive the healing herbal solution. Sophia had barely slept, but she felt more awake than she had in years. Every few minutes, she checked on baby Lily and Mira's cub, amazed at how much both babies had improved throughout the night. Their breathing was strong, their color healthy, and they seemed to be responding to each other's presence in remarkable ways. "Doctor," Carmen whispered, pointing toward the window, "look outside." Sophia turned to see what had captured Carmen's attention, and her breath caught in her throat. The forest around the clinic was alive with animals. Deer stood peacefully beside raccoons, rabbits sat next to squirrels, and even a family of foxes had emerged from the underbrush. All of them seemed to be waiting, watching the clinic with the same intelligent awareness she'd seen in the spirit bears. "Thomas," she called softly to the elderly man who was sitting quietly in the corner. "What's happening out there?" Thomas stood up slowly, his injured arm still in its makeshift sling, and walked to the window. When he saw the gathering of forest animals, his weathered face broke into a smile of pure wonder. "Word has spread," he said. "The spirit bears have told the other animals what happened here tonight. They're all coming to witness something they've never seen before." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "The birth of a new kind of relationship between humans and animals," Thomas replied. "What happened here tonight isn't just about saving 2 babies. It's about proving that cooperation between our species is possible." But even as Thomas spoke those hopeful words, Sophia noticed something that made her stomach turn with worry. The silver-tipped male bear, who had been the leader of the group throughout the night, was showing signs of distress. His breathing had become labored, and he kept looking toward the back door of the clinic with obvious concern. Mira noticed her mate's distress and made a series of urgent sounds. Thomas listened carefully, then his face went pale. "What's wrong?" Diana asked, sensing the change in atmosphere. "There's trouble coming," Thomas said grimly. "The spirit bears can sense it. Humans are approaching, and they're not coming to help." As if to confirm his words, they heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching on the mountain road. But these weren't the gentle sounds of rescue workers or medical personnel. These were the aggressive roars of multiple engines, moving fast and with obvious purpose. "Who would be coming up here?" Sophia asked. But even as she asked the question, she had a terrible feeling she already knew the answer. Thomas's expression grew darker. "3 weeks ago, when I was attacked by that sick bear, I wasn't alone in the forest. There were other people with me. People who don't understand the difference between a regular bear and a spirit bear." "What kind of people?" Carmen asked, though she was beginning to understand why Thomas looked so worried. "Hunters," Thomas said simply. "Professional hunters who were hired to track down and kill the bear that attacked me. They've been searching these mountains for weeks, and now they've found what they think is their target." The sound of vehicles was getting closer, and Sophia could see dust clouds rising from the mountain road. Whatever was coming their way would arrive within minutes. The spirit bears had obviously heard the approaching vehicles too, because their behavior changed immediately. Instead of the calm, organized cooperation they'd shown all night, they began moving with urgent purpose. The silver-tipped male made a series of deep, commanding sounds, and the other bears began responding with military-like precision. "They're preparing for a fight," Thomas said, watching the bears with obvious admiration and fear. "But 6 bears, no matter how intelligent, can't stand against professional hunters with modern weapons." Mira looked at her cub, who was still curled up beside baby Lily, and made a soft whimpering sound. Sophia realized with horror that the mother bear was facing an impossible choice: stay and protect both babies, or flee to save her own cub's life. "There has to be something we can do," Sophia said desperately. "We can't let them hurt these incredible animals." But before anyone could respond, the sound of vehicles stopped just outside the clinic. Car doors slammed shut, and they heard the voices of men talking in low, urgent tones. Through the window, Sophia could see at least 4 pickup trucks, each carrying what looked like professional hunting equipment. "Stay calm," Thomas whispered. "Let me handle this." But as he moved toward the front door, one of the hunters appeared at the window. He was a large man with a weathered face and cold eyes, carrying a high-powered rifle. When he saw the spirit bears inside the clinic, his eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like greed. "Well, I'll be damned," the hunter said to his companions. "We were looking for one bear, and we found a whole pack of them." Thomas opened the front door slowly, keeping his hands visible. "These aren't the bears you're looking for," he said calmly. "The one that attacked me was a sick young male. These are different animals entirely." The lead hunter, a man with gray hair and scars on his hands, stepped forward. "A bear's a bear, old man, and these are some of the biggest specimens I've ever seen. They'll bring a good price from the right collectors." Sophia felt sick as she realized what the hunter was implying. These men weren't just here to kill one dangerous bear. They were here to profit from killing as many bears as possible. "You don't understand," she said, stepping up beside Thomas. "These bears saved human lives tonight. They're not dangerous." The hunter laughed, a harsh sound that made all the spirit bears tense up. "Lady, I've been hunting bears for 30 years. They're all dangerous. And these big ones will make beautiful rugs for some rich folks' cabins." That's when Mira made a decision that changed everything. Instead of preparing to fight or flee, she did something that shocked everyone in the clinic. She carefully picked up her cub in her mouth and carried it over to baby Lily's crib. Then she gently placed the cub right next to the human baby, so that the 2 infants were touching. The message was clear. She was entrusting her most precious possession to the humans, asking them to protect her cub while she dealt with the threat outside. "She's asking us to take care of her baby," Diana whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She trusts us with her cub's life." The hunter outside was getting impatient. "Enough talking," he called out. "We're coming in to take those bears, one way or another." But before he could take another step, something extraordinary happened. The forest animals that had been gathering around the clinic all night suddenly moved into action. It started with the deer, who stepped out of the trees and formed a line between the hunters and the clinic. Then the raccoons emerged, followed by the foxes, the rabbits, and dozens of other animals. Within minutes, the hunters found themselves facing not just 6 spirit bears, but an entire army of forest creatures. Animals that should have been running from humans were instead standing their ground, creating a living barrier around the clinic. "What the hell is going on here?" one of the hunters muttered, clearly unsettled by the unprecedented sight. The lead hunter raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Thomas stepped forward again. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said calmly. "And why not?" the hunter demanded. Thomas smiled, and for the first time since the hunters had arrived, he looked completely confident. "Because you're about to meet the one thing in these mountains that even professional hunters fear." As if summoned by his words, a new sound echoed through the forest. It was deeper than the spirit bear's calls, more primal and powerful. It seemed to come from the earth itself, vibrating through the ground and into the bones of everyone who heard it. The spirit bears responded immediately, making their own calls in return. But these weren't sounds of distress or warning. They were sounds of greeting and respect. "What is that?" Carmen asked. though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Thomas's smile grew wider. "That," he said, "is the sound of the Great Mother, the oldest and most powerful spirit bear in the mountains, and she's not happy about uninvited guests threatening her children." The trees at the edge of the clearing began to shake, as if something enormous was moving through them. The hunters, who had seemed so confident just moments before, began to look nervous. Even the most experienced hunter knew better than to mess with a bear they couldn't see. "How big is this Great Mother?" Sophia asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "Big enough that the local tribes have been telling stories about her for over 200 years, Thomas replied. "Some say she's the mother of all spirit bears. Others believe she's something even more ancient and powerful." The shaking in the trees was getting closer, and now they could hear the sound of massive paws moving through the underbrush. Whatever was approaching was larger than anything Sophia had ever imagined. The lead hunter was clearly having second thoughts about his mission. "Maybe we should come back another day," he said to his companions. But before they could retreat, the Great Mother emerged from the forest. Sophia's mouth dropped open as she saw the most magnificent creature she'd ever encountered. The Great Mother was easily twice the size of the other spirit bears, with fur that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Her eyes held an intelligence so deep and ancient that looking into them felt like staring into the wisdom of the earth itself. But what struck Sophia most was the way all the other animals reacted to the Great Mother's presence. Every creature in the clearing, from the smallest rabbit to the largest spirit bear, bowed their heads in a gesture of deep respect. Even the forest itself seemed to grow quieter, as if nature was holding its breath in the presence of something sacred. The Great Mother approached the clinic slowly, her massive paws making no sound despite her incredible size. When she reached the group of hunters, she stopped and looked at each man individually, not with aggression or threat, but with a gaze that seemed to see right into their souls. The lead hunter, who had been carrying his rifle with confidence just minutes before, slowly lowered the weapon. His hands were shaking, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. We should go," he stammered, backing away from the enormous bear. But the Great Mother wasn't finished with them yet. She made a sound that was part growl, part song, and part something else entirely. It was a sound that spoke of ancient wisdom, of the deep connection between all living things, and of the consequences that came with harming the innocent. Thomas translated softly, "She's telling them that these mountains are under her protection, that anyone who comes here with violence in their hearts will face the consequences of their actions." The hunters needed no further encouragement. They scrambled back to their vehicles, throwing their equipment into the trucks with panicked haste. Within minutes, they were driving back down the mountain road, leaving nothing but dust clouds in the memory of their fear. As the sound of the vehicles faded into the distance, the Great Mother turned her attention to the clinic. She approached the building with the same careful respect that the other spirit bears had shown, but when she looked through the window and saw Mira's cub curled up beside baby Lily, something remarkable happened. The ancient bear's eyes filled with what could only be described as joy. She made a soft, melodious sound that seemed to convey approval and blessing. Then she looked directly at Sophia with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. "She's thanking you," Thomas said softly, "for accepting her children as equals, for treating them with the respect and kindness they deserve." Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked into the Great Mother's ancient gaze. "Tell her," she said, "that it was an honor, that we learned more from them in one night than we could have learned in a lifetime." Thomas conveyed her message, and the Great Mother nodded slowly. Then she did something that would stay with Sophia for the rest of her life. The ancient bear gently touched the window with her massive paw, right where Sophia's hand was pressed against the glass from the inside. For a moment, human and spirit bear were connected by nothing more than a thin piece of glass, but Sophia felt a connection that went deeper than anything she'd ever experienced. She understood, in that instant, that she was part of something much larger than herself, a web of life that connected all living things in ways that science was only beginning to understand. The Great Mother held that connection for several heartbeats, then slowly stepped back. She made one final sound, a call that seemed to echo through the mountains and into the very heart of the forest. It was a call of peace, of hope, and of the promise that this new understanding between humans and animals would continue to grow. As the Great Mother disappeared back into the forest, followed by the other spirit bears and forest animals, the clinic fell into a peaceful silence. Baby Lily and Mira's cub were both sleeping peacefully, their breathing strong and steady. The natural IV system that the bears had created continued to drip life-saving medicine into both babies, a testament to the incredible collaboration that had saved their lives. But Sophia knew that what had happened here was about much more than saving two babies. It was about proving that cooperation between humans and animals was not only possible but essential for the survival of both species. As she looked at the two sleeping infants, one human, one bear, curled up together in the same crib, Sophia realized that she was looking at the future. A future where the barriers between species were replaced by understanding, respect, and mutual aid. The question now was what would happen when word of this incredible night spread beyond the mountains. Would other humans be ready to accept that animals were far more intelligent and capable than anyone had ever imagined? Or would fear and prejudice prevent them from embracing this new understanding? Only time would tell. But as Sophia watched the two babies breathing in perfect synchronization, she felt hopeful for the first time in years. The mother bear had shared more than just an IV drip with a human baby. She had shared the possibility of a better world for all living creatures. 3 hours later, as the morning sun climbed higher over Pine Ridge, the sound of rescue helicopters finally echoed through the mountains. The roads had been cleared, and help was on its way. But as Sophia prepared to explain the miraculous events of the night to the incoming medical team, she realized that no one would ever believe what had really happened. Carmen was thinking the same thing. "Doctor," she said quietly, "how do we tell them about this?" Before Sophia could answer, baby Lily stirred in her crib and opened her eyes for the first time in days. The infant's gaze was clear and bright, and when she saw Mira's cub sleeping beside her, she did something that made everyone's hearts skip a beat. She smiled. It was a pure, innocent smile that seemed to hold all the wonder and possibility of the world. And as if responding to some invisible signal, Mira's cub opened its eyes too. The young bear looked at baby Lily, and then did something that defied everything anyone thought they knew about wild animals. The cub smiled back. Not the way humans smile, but with an expression of contentment and joy that was unmistakably the same emotion. The two babies looked at each other with a recognition that went deeper than species, deeper than instinct. They looked at each other like old friends who had been reunited after a long separation. Marcus and Diana Chen stood frozen, watching their daughter interact with a bear cub as if it was the most natural thing in the world. There was no fear in baby Lily's eyes, no distress at being so close to a wild animal. Instead, there was pure acceptance and affection. "They're bonded," Thomas said softly, watching the two infants with amazement. The shared experience of being healed together has created a connection between them that will last their entire lives. As the sound of the helicopters grew closer, Thomas knew it was time for the spirit bears to leave. Mira appeared at the clinic window, having returned from the forest where she'd been waiting for the human rescuers to arrive. When she saw her cub interacting with baby Lily, her massive frame seemed to relax with relief and satisfaction. Mira made a soft calling sound, and her cub reluctantly pulled away from baby Lily. But before leaving the crib, the young bear did something that brought tears to everyone's eyes. It gently nuzzled the human baby's cheek, a gesture of goodbye that was tender and full of love. Baby Lily reached out with her tiny hand and briefly touched the cub's fur, as if she understood that her friend was leaving but wanted to say goodbye properly. Thomas approached the window where Mira was waiting. "You did something incredible here," he told the mother bear. "You showed us all what's possible when we put aside our fears and prejudices." Mira looked at him with those intelligent dark eyes, then shifted her gaze to each person in the clinic. To Sophia, who had opened her medical facility to wild animals without hesitation. To Carmen, who had assisted in the most unusual medical procedure of her career. To Marcus and Diana, who had trusted a bear with their daughter's life. Then Mira made a sound that Thomas had never heard before. It was soft and melodious, almost like a lullaby. As she made this sound, something magical happened in the clinic. All the medical equipment that the spirit bears had used, the natural IV tubes made from reeds, the herbal solution they'd created, even the carefully arranged medicinal plants, began to glow with a soft, golden light. "What's happening?" Carmen whispered, staring at the glowing herbs in amazement. Thomas smiled as he understood what Mira was doing. "She's leaving us a gift," he said. "The knowledge they shared tonight won't disappear when they leave. The healing plants they used will continue to grow and thrive, providing natural medicine for anyone who needs it." As Mira continued her melodious sound, the golden light spread from the herbs to the babies themselves. Both baby Lily and the bear cub began to glow with the same gentle radiance, and Sophia could actually see their bodies growing stronger before her eyes. "They're being blessed," Thomas explained. "Mira is ensuring that both babies will grow up healthy and strong, and that they'll never forget the bond they formed here tonight." The golden light lasted for only a few moments, but when it faded, both babies looked healthier than they had since arriving at the clinic. Baby Lily's skin had a healthy pink glow, and her breathing was completely normal. The bear cub's coat was shiny and full, and its eyes were bright with energy and intelligence. Mira made one final sound, a call that seemed to echo through the mountains and reach every living creature in the forest. It was a call of gratitude, of hope, and of promise. A promise that the connection formed between human and animal would continue to grow and strengthen. As the mother bear turned to leave, baby Lily began to cry. Not the weak, pitiful cry of a sick infant, but the strong, healthy cry of a baby who was sad to see a friend go. Mira heard the cry and paused, looking back at the clinic with obvious emotion. For a moment, it seemed like she might stay, but then the sound of the helicopters grew even louder, and Mira knew that her time with the humans was over. She made one last soft grunt, a sound that somehow conveyed, "Until we meet again," and disappeared into the forest with her cub. The rescue helicopters landed just as the last of the spirit bears vanished into the trees. The medical team that emerged was expecting to find a critically ill baby and a clinic in crisis. Instead, they found baby Lily sitting up in her crib, healthy and alert, reaching toward the window as if searching for something she'd lost. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the emergency physician who led the rescue team, examined baby Lily with growing amazement. "This is impossible," she said to Sophia. "According to your report, this baby was near death from dehydration. But she's completely healthy. Better than healthy, she's thriving." Sophia looked around the clinic at the remnants of the most extraordinary night of her life. The natural fourth system had dissolved back into simple reeds and herbs. The glowing plants had returned to their normal appearance. Even the scent of the spirit bears had faded, leaving only the memory of their incredible presence. Sometimes, Sophia said carefully, medicine involves more than just science. Sometimes it involves believing in possibilities we never thought existed. Dr. Mitchell raised an eyebrow but didn't pursue the subject. The important thing was that baby Lily was healthy and ready to go home with her parents. As the medical team prepared to transport the Chen family back to the city, Diana approached Sophia with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "Thank Mira," Sophia replied, looking toward the forest where the spirit bears had disappeared. "She's the one who saved your daughter's life." Diana nodded, understanding somehow that there was much more to the story than she would ever fully know. "Will we ever see them again?" she asked. Sophia thought about the bond she'd witnessed between baby Lily and the bear cub, about the promise in Mira's final call, and about the golden light that had blessed both babies. "I think," she said, "that this is just the beginning." As the helicopters lifted off and carried the Chen family back to their normal lives, Sophia remained at the clinic with Carmen and Thomas. The three of them stood at the window, looking out at the forest that had revealed so many secrets in a single night. "Will anyone believe what happened here?" Carmen asked. Thomas smiled and pointed to the corner where the spirit bears had arranged their medicinal herbs. The plants were still there, but now they were growing. Actually growing, their roots extending into the clinic floor, and their leaves reaching toward the sunlight streaming through the windows. "They don't need to believe in words," he said. "The proof will grow right here, providing natural medicine for anyone who needs it. And every time someone is healed by these plants, they'll be connected to the spirit of cooperation that made it all possible." Sophia nodded, understanding that the clinic had become something more than a medical facility. It had become a bridge between two worlds, a place where the impossible became possible through compassion and trust. Years later, people would come from all over the world to visit the Pine Ridge Clinic, drawn by stories of miraculous healings and the unusual gardens that grew inside the building. They would hear whispers about the night when bears and humans worked together to save lives, but most would dismiss the stories as folklore. But for those who looked carefully, there were signs everywhere of what had really happened. In the way, forest animals no longer feared the clinic, but instead seemed to protect it. In the unusual medicinal plants that grew nowhere else in the world. And in the way some children, especially those who had been healed at the clinic, sometimes claimed they could understand what animals were thinking. Baby Lily Chen grew up to become a veterinarian, dedicating her life to caring for animals with the same compassion that Mira had shown her. She never forgot the bear cub who had shared her crib, and sometimes when she was working with wild animals she could swear she heard a familiar sound, a soft grunt that seemed to say, "Hello, old friend." And on certain nights when the moon was full and the forest was quiet, visitors to Pine Ridge would report seeing enormous shadows moving through the trees around the clinic. Shadows that seemed to be watching over the place where a mother bear had once shared an IV drip with a human baby, and in doing so had changed the world forever. The mother bear hadn't just shared medical treatment with a dying infant. She had shared the most precious gift of all, the knowledge that love, compassion, and cooperation could overcome any barrier, even the one between species. And in a world that often seemed divided by fear and misunderstanding, that was the most healing medicine of all.